It's really important to understand early on how you want to divide up equity in your company. This is important so that everybody that's involved in the company, whether they be founders, other owners, workers who may be getting equity, and investors, have an understanding of how much equity they have in the company. You want to have the discussion about ownership splits and equity splits in the company early on so that, again, you avoid any misunderstanding of how much ownership interest people have in the company, and people are aware that for their contribution, they're getting a certain percentage of the company. You want to make sure it's documented and that it's clearly agreed to by you and your other founders in the company. This is something that you will be working with your other founders on. A lawyer may be able to give you some guidelines, which I will give you, but ultimately the decision is up to you as to how you want to split up the equity, because only you and the other people who are involved in the company really understand how you are contributing to the company now and how you'll do so in the future. It's important that when you're having these discussions about equity splits, that you don't take the approach of trying to get as much equity as possible without thinking fairly about the other person's contributions to the company. Because everybody should feel good about the equity that they're getting in the company, and they're more incentivized to work hard for the company and make sure that they're contributing as much as possible to the company's success. So what are the factors you need to think about when splitting up equity? The factors include whether the founders have contributed cash or intellectual property to the company, and if you as a faculty member who has contributed intellectual property, obviously you should get rewarded for that contribution of intellectual property. When you're thinking about other people and other contributions they've made and the significance of the intellectual property that they're contributing, you want to take that into account when splitting up the equity. You also want to think about who was the person who actually came up with the idea. If it was you as the faculty member who developed the technology, then that should carry a significant amount of weight, and your equity distribution should be a little greater. But you also not only want to look at what IP was contributed and cash that was contributed and whether you came up with the idea, but what are you going to be doing going forward? If you have an individual who has contributed to the intellectual property, but they're not interested in moving forward to further commercialize that technology, then that person shouldn't receive as much equity as somebody else who did contribute to the intellectual property and is willing to work on the company, work to commercialize the technology, and continue on with the company. Another factor to consider is whether you will work full-time or part-time on the venture. And obviously somebody who is going to be working full-time should receive more equity than that person who isn't able to devote as much time to the company. Other issues that you want to look at when splitting up the equity are whether an individual put more time and had more responsibility prior to incorporation than another person. And finally, other issues include whether an individual will have a greater responsibility going forward, or will an individual provide greater value to the company going forward. Does somebody have a particular skill set that's really important for the company that's going to provide a lot of value, such as a technical person who's necessary to further commercialize the technology, or a marketing person who's necessary to make sure that people know about the product. These are a few of the factors that you want to keep in mind as you are splitting up equity in the company, but there may be others that are important for you to think about when you're doing this task. It may not be the most comfortable conversation to have with your other founders or members of the company, but important to do early so that everybody is on the same page about what they're contributing to the company. And once you've made this decision, you can move on to further commercializing the technology. There really are no magic numbers or specific numbers of percentage ownership that certain individuals should have in the company. You may want to check with founders of other companies or people who work with startups to see whether there are particular ranges that are appropriate, for example, for a CTO who's not a founder of the company, or other positions such as those. Make sure you have the conversation early and keep these factors in mind so you can have a successful discussion.